Welcome to So What's It Actually About? I'm your host, Margie, and I, along with my wide array of guests, hope to help you better understand and weather the wonderful world of actuarial science. Hello, and welcome to the season's last episode. Can you believe it? And we have Adam again with us. So
Hello.
Welcome, Adam.
Margie, thank you for having me back.
This is so exciting. So today's episode is a little bit different because we're going to be looking at the concept of actual versus expected. And what we'll be doing is we'll chat about what that means in actuarial science, why that's important. And then Adam is going to interview me.
We're going to turn the tables on
I'm
you.
a little bit scared. And we're going to do an actual versus expected exercise with regards to this podcast and say, what was it that we expected?
Yes.
And what actually happened?
Yes.
And go from there. So what would be your understanding of the whole concept of actual versus expected? Why do we care?
So I think I always go back to actuarial control cycle.
I'm a word, ACC.
Yes, I'm an honest student's nightmare. So obviously in the beginning, you want to identify some sort of problem. Then you develop a solution and then you monitor the results. Because obviously, you know, the problem that you came up with in your head and what you wanted to happen is you need to see that it actually worked. If you go and sell a product and it's not selling to anyone, you need to figure out why. Because there's something going wrong. And so this actual versus expected exercise is essentially to try and assess where things go right, where things go wrong, what was unexpected, and what actually happened. And in my eyes, I mean, so in terms of what's actually happened in the podcast, firstly, also congratulations on the first season.
Sure. Yeah, it's been crazy.
Yeah, and then the feedback has been great. So maybe we can start there. What did you expect to get out of this exercise when you first started the podcast?
So it was interesting because I started it in an attempt to inform, I think. You know, I realized that a lot of my students, being in a lecturing role, you obviously interact with students a lot, actually had no idea what they were doing. You know, they were just learning these like seemingly random distributions or whatever skill set they were developing, but had no idea what it was that they were working towards. And I also, having worked in a school before, there were a number of students in that space that were like, oh, I'm thinking about actuarial science, but I'm reading stuff and I'm like, I still don't understand.
Yes.
And one thing I have realized throughout my life is that we organize our thoughts through conversation. And often hearing other people converse helps us understand, you know, and that's why I was like, okay, maybe if we have conversations with various people who are experts, because I'm not an expert in everything, and get their insights, maybe it can fill that gap.
Yes.
And
you identified the problem.
I feel like I might have also created a problem sometimes when, by the way, I interviewed people with my bad jokes. But yeah, it was. I think it became so much more than what I thought it would be.
So maybe we can start there. What was the more? So starting from an informative place, which I think this is absolutely done. So in terms of A versus E there, the feedback I get on the podcast is exactly that. And, you know, just personally this is exactly something I wish I had when I'd started.
Yeah.
So I mean, talking about school students, I didn't how to spell the word actuary. Like it's like twos. Why is it not?
One of my favorite quotes of the whole season was that.
And so the informative part is absolutely there. And so what else? That sort of was the expected that I think you sort of moved on, and then the actual. What else was it?
So I think there were a number of sort of actuals, both personally and from the audience. As I think I saw that it actually became a sense of community for people, and I had a number of people say to me, I don't feel alone. You know, I can see other people have gone through it, and it almost was a little bit inspirational for some people to say, you know, there's these giants of the game, like people like Steve and that sort of thing, and to have them talk so frankly about what it is to be an actuary, and be so relatable and open. And a number of people saying, you know, I'm an actuary now, but I wanted to quit actuarial science every single year I was studying it. And I think that there's an inspiration that comes from seeing that these people are human as well.
Yeah.
And so like your struggles aren't unique to you, even though there's a uniqueness to them, but there is a sort of a more global struggle with actuarial science that you can kind of like tap into, you know, like we all plug into this like massive extension cord of stress and it's like, okay, actually we're part of a community, albeit a small community, but there's so much more to it. And I think that for me was so encouraging, because I also felt that when I interviewed the people, you know, having interviewed, like, for example, Peter, and he said, I didn't know I wanted to become this thing, and I respect him so much, as an actuary, as a person, and then to see him say, I actually really didn't like stats. And I was like, no way, and I think that that's really helpful to people like me and to people who've had to, do stats again or whatever. So that element of inspiration, I think, was so much more than what I expected. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, touching on that, in preparation for this, as I've listened to the podcast, I've pulled out quotes and things or things that sort of stood out in the episodes. And I think a common theme is around exactly that, of realizing that people are humans. And you said it while we were having a coffee, but that oftentimes, I think, going through the process before you're qualified, you look at these people ahead of you who are qualified, and it seemed inevitable.
Yeah.
Like, of course they're qualified, of course, but I'm the one who's struggling. And I see it in my students and a couple of your guests mentioned it, but during the university process, because these are some of the brightest students, they've always been at the top. And this is the first time that they're struggling with things. That they're having to rethink about how to learn, about how to actually challenge themselves. And that can be a very lonely process. And so being able to hear other people's struggles, and particularly people I look up to, a lot of these guests, I'm blown away that you've been able to chat to them, and just how it makes me so happy that these actuaries exist in South Africa, because they are truly amazing people.
Yeah, very much so.
And getting to hear, but that, they also struggled. They also failed Stats 1, or that they in the beginning weren't sure if they wanted to be an actuary or didn't know how to spell the word actuary.
Very much so. And I think what was quite interesting for me is interviewing some people who almost seem like actuarial celebrities.
Yes.
Who I didn't actually think would be very keen on being on the podcast, because it was sort of like this kind of passion project for me, and yet every single person I asked was like, yes, there's a need for this, I'll jump on, like I had people like make time in their schedules, like during the day, and I'd be like, I'm in Joburg for like a week, can we make a plan? And people like shifting like meetings around for this, and I'm like, it's a sort of like very peripheral podcast, but they understood the need, and I think I didn't realize how big that need was.
Yes.
I could see it in my own students, but it was fairly anecdotal.
Yes.
Like a sample, and it actually realized there was a population issue. So I did have a representative sample then.
So when you were designing the product, essentially, your target demographic was actually a lot bigger than you expected.
So much bigger. Absolutely. So much bigger. And I think that's also been reflected in the number of listens, you know? Yes. So like I was thinking I'd get like 10 listens per podcast, and it sits at sort of like 250, 300 listens per podcast. I think most of them are from my mom, but thanks, Mom.
A lot of the ones of mine are me listening to myself talk over and over again.
Not a narcissist at all.
No. But it is, and that need is there. I think it strikes to something very human of this. I often say I ask my students, do you have a support system around you?
Yeah.
Of people to talk to, because my sort of anecdotal experiences there's some dark times in the third year. I remember a period of 3 weeks. So it was 3 friends and I.
I remember you telling me the story.
And each week, one of us just could not, just absolutely checked out of university, stayed at home for the entire week in the covers. And you need other people to kind of bring you back in to say, this is what you've missed. Maybe do you want to start coming back to, because it gets very difficult, particularly. And what's been great to also see, I think, what I didn't expect from sort of the podcast was the variety of actuaries that you've had in terms of
it's been incredible
of people that have really struggled or have had to work extremely hard. And because of that, of people coming from such a diverse background, oftentimes when they get into the university or actuarial process, they feel alone because they don't see themselves represented. They don't see themselves, they don't know how to talk the language that it seems like everyone else knows how to talk.
100%.
And so this podcast is being a way of an ability to actually start to learn these things and to feel like, there are people out there.
I think it's actually such an interesting thing that you say there, is that the variety of different guests was by design. Because I think for me, I realized more and more that element of representation is so important to see someone that's gone before. So like, for example, someone like Amor was like, I was so inspired, but also so important to have him on the show, to be like, this is someone who can represent what you can become, and it's not necessarily the normal face. I don't know how to say normal in inverted commas, like that you would associate with actuarial science, but actually you shouldn't have a specific face to actuarial science, because it can be any type of person. Obviously you have similar proficiencies, like you have to be numerate, etc. But you can come from different spaces, and I think
And find
the
your
more
niche.
people we have from different spaces, the more robust the profession is.
Yes,
Because
yes.
you bringing those, like, we create products for a variety of people, and so we need those variety of people represented in how we design a product.
Yes.
You know, and so, like, that for me, women, and like having that sort of representation was really important, because I think if you can see someone and be like, oh, there's me in a couple of years, which I had, like, let's say, for example, with Megan,
Yes.
you know, she lectured me, and interviewing her, it was such a strange sort of outworking for me, because it was like, I wanted to be you.
Literally.
You know, and that was really encouraging to be like, you know, you encourage me, and I hope maybe one of my guests can do that to one of my listeners.
Yes. And yeah, I mean, on the topic of Megan, so now talking about your guests, I think what I also really loved is with this diversity of people's process around it, of also the discovery that I think and you were also talking about this over coffee, of when people say, oh, I didn't realize an actuary can have so many friends. Like, know so many people on this podcast, there's so many personality types in actuarial science nowadays, and the ability to find your passion. It was so nice to hear a lot of your guests like Megan talk about this idea of, they were worried, and because I was also worried about it, it felt a bit too technical for me in the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, where is the creativity? Where is the, like,
Humanity.
the creation of things.
Yeah.
And you can find that as well. Just the scope of what you can do with this degree and this qualification is unbelievable. And that was so nice to see, of like how
Very much. Yeah. And for me, that was actually so surprising, and maybe it was naive going in, but I learned so much. So often in the podcast, I'd be like, for our listeners, please explain. And I'd be like, it's actually for your girl Margie. Like, your girl Margie doesn't understand what you are saying.
Well, that's me as well. I'm very glad that you asked this question.
Especially like the exotic option, where I was like, oh, is it an option that wins on holiday? So cringe.
But it does, and we were also talking about this, of a lot of this is jargon, and for people coming, like, especially students listening to this, is a way for them to understand these things. This is the first time that they're encountering them. If I look back to kind of when I just started university, I knew nothing about the products that are on offer, or like, you know, what is the difference between like private medical insurance and a health scheme? Like, and being able to listen to South African actuaries talk about it in a really intellectual and kind, compassionate way. Like, just to see both the human but also the intellect behind these people is phenomenal. So maybe we can chat on your sort of experience per episode. What did you expect from the interviews, and how did they actually go for you? What sort of lessons you learned?
I think for me, I hadn't interviewed people much beforehand. And so I kind of went in, and I think my first couple of episodes were easier because I felt like it was my brother, the first one. So it was easy. And then you and I just had natural connection. So it was easy to chat. But it's like in other ones, like, I felt like sometimes I overspoke, because I was like, I want this conversation to be like tailored to this need that I think there is. And yet I realized when I just let people speak, that they actually could add their own insight. And the biggest thing is I just needed to give them that airtime. And so that was a learning for me. And just in the beginning, sort of start on a personal note and get them going, and then they would go, and it was fine. And so I think in the beginning, you can definitely see in the early ones that, like, I'm building up confidence. I'm hoping I improved. So
I mean, I think you've done a phenomenal job.
Thank you.
And again, the humanity behind it, I think you talk about this idea that so many of these actuaries were willing to give their time and things. And I think it also reflects back to you of just how, because you've come from a place of curiosity, and I think to the listeners, this is something I wish people had told me earlier, is there is help out there if you ask for it. From a place of like general curiosity. I'm very much a person who I think most people do want to help, particularly all the actuaries I've kind of known of. I've been the one who hasn't asked for help. And if I'd just actually taken the sort of step to do it, that expectation of that people are going to say no to you, and then
I just, like, when I would ask someone, like, for example, when I asked Steve, like, I sent the email and I had to put my phone down and go for like a walk. And I was like, it's okay, Margie. He says no, so right, you're still like a worthwhile person. And he was like so open to it, you know. And I think that was interesting for me, because I didn't think people would be as keen. But I think what people also realize, which I hope they would, but I mean, you can never control how people perceive things, is that the podcast wasn't about me. It was like, it's about actuarial science, about creating that access and that conversation. And I think when people realized it was about that, they were so willing because it wasn't